everybody. Well, it was a bad debate. What got overlooked was how awful Trump was. Practically every word out of his mouth was a lie, but that got ignored because of the conspicuously embarrassing and frankly scary performance by a president who has clearly had some significant cognitive decline and put us in a very precarious situation. Yes, he gave a good speech at a rally the next day, but that was on prompter. Now, the president's job is not debating, and he has staff, supposedly the best people in the world, or at least in the country, to advise him. But the thing about the president of the United States is that the decisions that he or she, but so far he, makes are decisions that only he can make. A decision that gets to the president's desk is a decision that only he can make. This election is so important, perhaps the most important since 1932 or 1864 or 1860, because Donald Trump is a threat to our democracy, and someone has to beat him. And the question is, do you replace Biden, or is that too risky going into an open convention, which we haven't done since 1968 in Chicago? I don't know what to do. Biden has put the party in an unbelievably precarious position. The downside of keeping him at the head of the ticket is apparent. If his decline has been that dramatic over the last 3.5 years, imagine what it would be over the next 4. On the other hand, the downsides of opening up the process are unknowable and potentially huge. My guest this week is Norm Ornstein, scholar emeritus of the American Enterprise Institute, part of the pantheon of this podcast's greatest guests. Norm and I recorded this on Friday morning after the Thursday night debate. And as we discussed that, the news of the court overturning the Chevron doctrine was announced. An enormous victory for big business interests, unraveling the administrative state and the power of regulatory agencies to regulate, pretty much everything from food and drugs to our air and water to our financial markets. Dahlia Lithwick will be joining me in 2 weeks. Talk about all the SCOTUS decisions this term. Next week will be the 4th of July weekend, and we'll be airing or streaming, I guess, an encore of my conversation with the great Heather Cox Richardson. But now, Norm Ornstein, and a great one, for a change. Well, we got a great one today, everybody, for a change, because of the debate last night, which was a great one, for a change. Norm Ornstein is with me. Hey, Norm.
Hi, Al.
So could this be considered a nightmare, what we had last night?
I think nightmare is a good way to frame it. It's a jolt, and staying up late to watch and then watch the reactions and then having trouble sleeping through much of the night. For me, the white nightmare works.
I was watching it with Franny, and even before he got to the podium,
yeah,
we looked at each other. It was hard to watch. And if he had been just normally on his game, just normally, I'm not talking about State of the Union, which is what we were hoping for, the State of the Union Joe.
Yeah.
We got this first debate Joe, which was a disaster. But if he'd just been normal, then the lie after lie after lie after lie from Trump would have been the story, right?
Absolutely. The first goal, obviously, is you want to counter the biggest drawback or problem that you have. And for him as a president, it is that he's old and feeble. It was so interesting to watch, in the run up to the debate. First, we had this drumbeat by Republicans and Fox and others, sometimes using doctored video, that Biden was addled, didn't know where he was, and couldn't keep a train of thought.
Right.
Then, as they realized they might have gone too far and set the bar too low, we saw, the best example was Kevin McCarthy, who last year told people all the time, boy, I've been so much with Biden in private meetings, he's sharp as could be. Then picked up the party line, oh, he's stumbling, he's confused. And then right before the debate said, actually, he's really sharp. And if he had just been average, it would have worked very much to his advantage. And being average, not just in the answers that he gave directly and the confusion, which started with the first answer where he lost his train of thought and made a bunch of miscues, 15,000 jobs being an example.
As opposed to having created 15 million jobs or 15 million new jobs, because when he inherited the presidency, we were still in the COVID.
Yeah, and Trump had seen a complete hemorrhaging of jobs more than any other president. But, when you mistake 15 million for 15,000, when you talk about billions when you mean trillions and trillions when you mean billions, it doesn't help. But what I had hoped for was that with the moderators refusing to follow up, best example for me, when they asked a question about his plan for mass deportation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just that Trump and his people have said they're going to try to deport 12 million migrants, but he's called them animals.
He called for cage matches.
Yeah.
As an entertainment of two migrants fighting each other. I mean, back to Rome.
It's like a Squid Game with migrants. If your moderators are not going to follow through when he doesn't even begin to answer the question, Biden had to follow through and basically say, well, I'll answer it for him and go through all of this stuff. And he didn't do that. There was nothing in his responses except at least a few good facts towards the end that would have made for a decent debate. And I will say, Al, I watched with Judy and the same reaction, right?
Judy is Norm Ornstein's wife, Judy Harris.
Yes.
Just doing a little fact checking.
Thank you. We need fact checking. It's true. Biden's had back issues and he broke a foot. But the way he walked onto that stage compared to Trump walking onto that stage.
Trump cuts quite a figure coming out there.
Trump, the guy who drives his golf cart onto the green because he doesn't think he can walk the 20 yards. The guy who used motorization back when he was at the G20 summit while everybody else walked the quarter mile. But he walks out there, those 10 or 12 steps, and at least looked vigorous. And that was not the contrast we needed.
Well, I mean, as soon as this started, Franny and I turned each other in. I can't remember which one of us said nightmare first. I don't know. Did they give him NyQuil instead of Dayquil? I mean,
Yeah, that may be the case. It may be that he took something, but he was also clearly tired. And part of debate preparation for your people is to make sure that you're rested and vigorous. There's something weird going on.
Well, he was sick. I mean, there's that, but that's the point. If you're sick and you're 51 and give a bad performance, that's one thing. But incumbent presidents have a bad first debate. And that's been true with HW. That was true. It wasn't true with Clinton, was it?
It was not true with Clinton. It was true with Ford. It was true with Reagan. And it was true with Obama.
But so that's normal. But they had to know this wasn't a normal thing. And evidently at Camp David, they had set up a stage that was supposedly like the stage was going to be in Atlanta. And I wonder if they had cameras, and because he was looking down, and he wasn't looking at Trump and he wasn't looking at the moderators. It was kind of hard to figure out what the hell he was doing. Let me ask you, where does this put the Democratic Party? I saw you on Morning Joe, and you were saying you're sort of on the side of this is not practical to now change horses.
There's no good way around all of this. We have, I think, a few possibilities here. One is that a lot of the people who either didn't watch the debate or who watched it through a different lens than some of the rest of us, that we don't see any significant softening of his support. And he gets out there in the next few days, not doing fundraisers, but actually being out with the public. I mean, the one thing I would do if I were around Biden right now is I would arrange a full 60 minutes interview for Sunday. Mm-hmm. Show that you are capable of handling an in-depth interview right now. Do several of those. And maybe you can sort of recover from this in the same way that Reagan recovered after an analogy.
He recovered with a joke.
Yeah, he recovered with a second debate, but we don't have one of those.
Well, we do have one of those, but it's not till when?
Not till September. It's way too late.
Way too late.
But he disarmed. You can recover. On the other hand, Jerry Ford reinforced the stereotype of him when he said Poland was free, that he was not up to the job and did not recover.
And that was a very, very close election.
Yeah. And
we have close elections.
Yeah. Way too many. So, maybe he can stabilize out of this. But if not, I just see so many people who think that there's this wonderful world where we snap our fingers and we get Gretchen Whitmer
or Gavin Newsom,
or the governors of Pennsylvania or Maryland. We get these wonderful figures stepping in, and we can just hand pick the ticket. That's not how it works. So if this turns worse in the next few days, the best outcome that I can imagine, which avoids a complete shit show at an open convention and the strong possibility that you spurn the heir apparent, a woman of color, which further divides your base. The best outcome would be that a combination of all the other putative candidates join with Biden and say, the president's decided he's not going to run again, and we're all rallying behind Kamala Harris, which may not be the best outcome in the world, but it would avoid the shit show that otherwise could take place and the uncertainty, heading into the fall.
Well, there are no good choices here. There just aren't. Kamala her approval ratings are actually below the president's, maybe not now after this debate, but I'm not sure that works either. Harris has been assigned by the president the two nightmare scenarios. She's had the border and Central America. He also gave her election reform. So she's been having this swim upstream for the whole 4 years, and I'm not sure that she would be the best standard bearer. I know what you're saying. It prevents a fight between, I don't know, who are we talking about?
If we had a wide open situation, remembering that it's only for a matter of a few weeks, you're going to have Gavin Newsom and Gretchen Whitmer, maybe one of these governors like Wes Moore or Josh Shapiro jumps in. You'll probably have some of the previous candidates, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar. There may be other senators who would decide that it's a good time to jump in. Then you have a convention that probably is chaotic, and you do not want a chaotic convention. What I'll say about Kamala Harris is that while I think she never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity in the first part of her vice presidency, the last few months she's been better, much better. And last night I saw her both on CNN and MSNBC, and she did pretty well. A Harris Newsom ticket, for example, both people who would be very forceful in taking it to Trump, what may not be the best. It's not what you or I or most others would draw up if we were able to dictate the terms. What has to happen here is that you get somebody who is at least going to come across as competent and able to govern, who can make the case that a vote for Donald Trump is a vote for a vicious dictatorship, who in a debate will strike back and do it in a much more forceful fashion, and who can actually make Trump's age and mental cognitive decline an issue in a way that Biden simply can't. All of these scenarios are unlikely. It's far more likely that he soldiers on, and we have a much more serious uphill battle than what was already a battle that we had to call uphill.
Yeah. I mean, okay, that's one, the alternative to opening the convention and having a shit show there is him soldiering on. I mean, you had the idea that he does a 60-minute interview, and doesn't he have to do those things? Don't we have like a number of days now where he has to prove himself enough to get people in the Democratic Party to go, okay, we're going to go forward?
He has to turn this around before July 4th. The way to do it is not, I listened to his campaign person saying he's got this fundraiser.
Yeah, well, those aren't public.
That's not what you need to be doing right now.
The problem now isn't fundraising at all.
It is quickly turning around the idea that you are in serious physical and mental decline. It is showing that this was more of an anomaly than the reality. He has to be honest about his age. He should be saying that, look, I've had these issues. That's why I walk so stiffly. And yeah, I make some mistakes sometimes. A lot of that's because of my stuttering. I wasn't doing well, but here's the real Joe Biden, which people who have been around him, foreign leaders and other political leaders, have said is a guy who's still plenty damn sharp and ready to carry forward his agenda. If he can't do that, and it has to be not just a 60 minutes interview, he should go ahead and do that long interview with the New York Times that they've refused to do so far. He should maybe do a town hall.
A town hall would be a good idea. So it'd be like doing the debate without the opponent. But town halls, he should offer up to whomever, MSNBC or CNN, and say, I'll do a town hall.
Yeah, you don't even have to do it by offering it up to a network. You can set up a town hall, and I think the networks would cover it because now it's an even bigger issue. There are ways to go forward, but they've got to develop a game plan right away, and they have to get him to sign onto it.
I think the town hall would have to be moderated by someone from one of the networks, don't you think? You can't have
it's perfectly fine.
Someone from the campaign.
Well, you can get a journalist as a moderator. Do it with MSNBC, but ask MSNBC to do what CNN did with the debate, which is to open it up to all other networks.
Yeah, I think you're right. You get a journalist who's not with MSNBC. I think that's like a caricature. We're going to give him to the network where that's in the tank with him, right?
Yeah.
I know they could get Jake Tapper and Dana Bash.
Brilliant. I suggested that the best debate moderators would be Jiminy Glick and Triumph the Insult Comic Dog.
Well, that would solve that because he'd have to be really on his best game for them. Okay, we got some other news today. The Supreme Court, have you been watching?
Sadly enough, I have been watching. We got two more important decisions today. The first is one that's called Grants Pass, which is an Oregon town that banned homeless people from sleeping outdoors. The court, on a 6-3 ruling, you can guess who the 6 are and who the 3 are, upheld that law, which basically means that other cities and some states are going to do the same thing, which means that homeless people are screwed because for many of them, there's no other place to go but outdoors. And what this is going to do is mean that our jails and prisons are going to be filled even more with homeless people who have no place to go.
And a lot of these people have
serious mental illness.
Serious mental illness problems that the worst thing to do is send them to prison.
Yep. It's going to be another horror show. And then the second decision, which is more significant in a broader sense, is they basically blew up the Chevron doctrine.
Explain what the Chevron doctrine is, Norm.
The Chevron doctrine says that if an agency follows the Administrative Practices Act, which means that before they do a regulation to implement the law, They will go through a process of opening up for public comment, show a deliberative process, and then issue their regulations. This court has said, and this is not the first time.
Well, the first case where they did this was was West Virginia versus the EPA.
Basically, what the court said was that if it wasn't explicitly in the law, and that includes a particular pollutant in the air or in the water, that the agency couldn't do it.
And that was about CO2, admitting CO2 into the air on electricity.
If you demand that Congress pass laws that includes things you can't predict in the future. Take one example. If you can't tell what the next virus is going to be, and you won't allow the Centers for Disease Control or the Department of Health and Human Services to act in a fashion to preclude another devastating pandemic, then the country is going to be in turmoil. And that would be the case if we had a Congress that could function. And now we have a dysfunctional Congress. And in effect, what they've done is to hamstring a president in a dysfunctional political system by usurping power that was never intended for the courts. So Joe Biden has the problem now of his own bad performance at the debate. The country has the problem of a narcissistic, psychopath felon who has promised a vicious dictatorship, who now has a leg up in becoming president. But even if somehow we get out of this and Biden prevails, we're still likely to have a Republican Senate. We're going to have an awful period because the court has hamstrung the ability of a president to act. Now, if Trump becomes president, my guess is that these 6 right-wing justices suddenly find more of a rationale for executive action. They did this with the CDC before in terms of setting up regulations for a pandemic. But you can just imagine the nightmares where you have a new pollutant that emerges, or you have a devastating attack on the water system, and we have no ability to deal with it. You can imagine every other agency that's trying to set regulations to deal with airline safety, or if any other health issue that emerges, unable to act, and a president unable to do anything when Congress won't allow him to do anything. And that's what the Republican Congress, if they have either house, is going to do if it's a Democratic president. This is a court that is out of control, frankly. And of course, we still have no decision on the immunity case.
Their delay on the immunity case was, I think, obviously designed to prevent a trial. And I think they've successfully done that.
Yep. It's a partisan radical court. And that is not helpful for America.
Okay. So as we're speaking, Norm, the court just released another decision. They have ruled that many of those who were arrested on January 6th were improperly arrested.
No, it's not so much that, Al. What they basically said is that what happened here was not a violation of impeding an official proceeding in Congress.
They were charged wrong, or they were...
So it doesn't mean that they will necessarily be released. What it does mean is that a lot of these sentences are going to be dramatically reduced. That means some people who were supposed to serve longer sentences will get out much earlier. And I'll tell you what the biggest implication is of this decision, which is it's an encouragement to more violence.
It's inviting the same thing to happen if Trump loses.
Yeah. And it's basically, we know that if Trump wins, he is going to pardon the vast majority of people who are in jail, even those with longer sentences. These long sentences, the tough actions taken, and here give credit to the Garland Justice Department for charging 1,000 people who were implicated. But the tough sentences said, hey, you do something like this again. You provoke violence again against public officials. You're going to get hit hard. And now it's basically saying a get out of jail free card. And that means the implications for more violence, the implications for going after the Capitol again next January 6th, if somehow Biden ekes out a narrow victory are profound, and it's really unsettling.
So right now we're faced with this what my wife called a nightmare, which is what happens in the next few days. Really, can Biden recover from this, or does he drop out? Isn't that really what we're faced with?
Yeah, what we're faced with is whether Biden can manage to treat this as a one-off and restore some sense of confidence that he's up to this job, or whether we continue to see deterioration and intense pressure for him to drop out. And if we have that intense pressure for him to drop out with deterioration and he doesn't, then go beyond the nightmare. We're in Friday the 13th, part 2.
Because if we see this drama playing out, and we're contributing to it right now, I guess, if you see this drama being played out and he doesn't drop out, it's a long ways to the second debate. And we're going to have, we're having 2 conventions before the debate, and we'll see what happens in Chicago.
Yeah. I think the next week is a critical week for Biden. He can recover from this. Whether he will recover from this and whether they'll do the things that are necessary for him to recover from this, those are very much open questions as we speak today. The other thing that we can talk about is this. So next week you're having Dahlia Lithwick. Dahlia and I wrote a piece in Slate last week. We're going to be hearing a lot of this from the people who support Trump, and that includes the greedy trader billionaires like Bill Ackman and Steve Schwartzman and David Sachs.
Where do those guys get their money? Are they in finance, or what were they
finance, hedge funds.
Okay.
All they care about is their tax rates, and they're very much reminiscent of much of the business community in 20s Germany. But that aside, they and others, including plenty of journalists, are going to be saying, yeah, Trump is bad, but not to worry. We have a safety net of protections that have kept us from going over the line for almost 250 years. And that includes in Trump's first term. He wasn't able to get away with a lot of things that he wanted to do. What Dahlia and I wrote is, don't be so sure of that the safety net that we've had, and that includes the courts and the Congress and the press, civic institutions, the business community, as well as governmental institutions that have provided checks and balances for all this time. I don't think we can trust any of them. What we know, unfortunately, much of this did not get covered in the debate, is that Trump has said he will fire the generals who won't do what he asked them to do, even if they violate their oaths of office and the Constitution. That he will send 12 million, as he calls them, animals to detention camps prior to deportation, that he will be a dictator on day one, that he will invoke the Insurrection Act and put down with military force in domestic situations any dissent or rioters. He has frequently called the press the enemy of the people. He will crack down on any dissent in the press. And what we've seen now from the Supreme Court, what we know from Republicans who are likely, especially if he wins, to have one, if not both, houses of Congress.
And what this Supreme Court may also have a couple new members.
Yeah.
If Alito and Thomas bow out, and they may be convinced to do that by some billionaires who say, if you leave now, you get your private jet, you get your home, whatever you want your home. I mean, that's all legal now, right? One of the court's decisions was that it's okay to, bribes are not okay before you make a decision, but after a decision, what was it called?
They called them gratuities.
A gratuity, a tip.
Yeah, the case involved $13,000.
Which is unbelievable.
The Roberts Court has chipped away at anything that would incriminate a public official involving bribery or quid pro quo. This is another huge step in that direction. Call it the Alito Thomas get out of jail free card. But what we also know is that you'll get Alito and Thomas then replaced by Aileen Cannon and somebody else.
By young judges. And if it's Aileen Cannon, that would be amazing. And It'd be two.
It would be, but I will tell you that the odds that a Republican Senate would confirm her are 100%.
Pretty good.
And then you're going to remember we have at least Sonia Sotomayor, who is in her 70s. And, you don't have that so much with Kagan, much less with Jackson. But we could easily see a 7-2 court that would be there for a very long period of time. And that's a nightmare beyond belief.
I'm just worried about a 6-3 court with two, 45-year-old justices who will be there for 35 years.
And they will be very radical partisan justices.
Yeah, maybe Collins and Murkowski would vote against a right-wing nut. So it might be important for us to have 49 rather than even if we're in the minority.
Well, I think I would expect Murkowski might. Collins won't do it unless her vote doesn't matter. If it's going to be a confirmation anyhow, she may vote no. We've seen any number of decisions involving judges, justices, and cabinet appointees from the Trump term where basically McConnell would give a green light to Collins and Murkowski if he knew he would prevail anyhow.
Yeah, like Collins voted for Betsy DeVos out of committee.
Yeah.
So that DeVos could come to the floor. And then Collins voted no. So it was 50-50 and Pence came in and cast the tie-breaking vote.
And, we know that there were votes in support of other cabinet members who lied in their confirmation hearings, including the head of EPA, the Secretary of the Interior. This is not a Senate where I would count on any of them doing the right thing when it would matter.
So the nightmare scenario, we continue to add details to it, but that is what we're looking at if Trump wins.
Yeah. Now, the other thing I would suggest for Biden, and I've suggested this many, many times, and so far without any action, Biden needs to do a summit in the White House on the threats to American democracy that he chairs and runs, because the other hope we have is that enough people will believe that a Trump presidency in a second term would not have the John Kellys or the Mark Espers or the 40 of the 44 cabinet members who said they can't support him, those who tried to keep him from doing horrible things, including suggesting he wanted to murder people. We're going to have an administration filled with the worst among the worst. It's the Michael Flynns and the Steve Bannons and the Stephen Millers and the Roger Stones who would stop at nothing to punish enemies.
And he has said that retribution is part of what his second term would be about.
And he will have an attorney general much worse than Bill Barr. And Bill Barr was the worst attorney general we have ever seen. He'll have an attorney general and U.S. attorneys in place who will stop at nothing to harass and charge their political opponents with no grounds whatsoever, and probably some judges who will go along with it.
That's what part of that nightmare last night was, is that we can see all this. This is stuff we've talked about. They are planning for this. Last time they were surprised they won. He didn't really have it figured out. He appointed kind of actually normal and very good people, Mattis and Kelly, and that's not going to happen this time.
No, in no instance will it happen. We are likely to have Michael Flynn as the Secretary of Defense. We're likely to have an attorney general who will do anything that he wants.
So Flynn, that's an interesting scenario. I mean, Flynn actually gets confirmed.
In this,
I mean,
if it's a Republican Senate, yes.
Yeah, and there's no Romney there.
No. We can talk about what Biden should have done, which doesn't much matter. But I have to tell you, when the issue of abortion came up, Biden didn't refer to Project 2025 and talk about how the Trump campaign, in close conjunction with the Heritage Foundation, has a plan that includes a nationwide ban on abortion, a war on contraception, a war on premarital sex and on gay marriage, that all of these things that they're talking about explicitly just didn't come up.
Now, wait a minute. How do you do a war against premarital sex? That I'd like to see.
The war on contraception is one significant part of it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. How much support in the country does outlawing married couples being able to get contraception?
I don't think they care about that. I think that they believe that if they control the reins of power, they can implement their vision of a society, no matter what public opinion says. And that's what they're doing with abortion all around the country. You know, one of the more cringeworthy moments from last night was when Biden started to talk about abortion. He meant to talk about some of the women who in these states have been bleeding nearly to death on the floor of emergency room bathrooms, who had to flee states, who were told that they would have to be near death with sepsis before doctors could intervene. And instead, he started to talk about a woman who was killed by a migrant and turned it back to the immigration issue.
Biden did that transition.
Biden did it.
To an issue that worked against him.
Yeah. So it wasn't just that he looked bad, that he stumbled and got confused. There were opportunities to have people thinking about what a Trump presidency would be like that were lost. You can get those back with a summit. You can get them back by turning this around in the next few days. If they don't do that, we're in a heap of trouble.
But there are not going to be 70 million people watching a summit that he has. That's the problem.
Well, I don't think you need 70 million people watching the summit, Al. The president still has a bully pulpit. And one of the problems that we have is most of the media have treated this election as a horse race, as they almost always do. And it's who's up and who's down, and that's all that it's going to be about now. And it's what the polls say. But if the president turns the focus to this, brings in all those former Trump people to talk about what a nightmare it would be, then you're going to have it covered. And it'll change at least some of the dialogue around.
Well, those people do that. I mean, all those people, Mattis and Kelly, there's plenty of former officials that say they won't.
Mattis, very possibly Milley, certainly Esper, certainly Kelly.
Esper defense, yeah.
Will be willing to come on to talk about how difficult it was in the first term, how close we came to utter catastrophe, and how bad it will be, how much worse it will be in a second term.
I have some quotes this is from Kelly. The depths of his dishonesty is just astounding to me. He is the most flawed person I have ever met in my life. And let me read a few others of these.
Good.
He is more dangerous than anyone could ever imagine. That's his Secretary of Defense, James Mattis. Here is John Bolton. Trump has this impression that foreign leaders, especially adversaries, hold him in high regard, that he has a good relationship with Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un. In fact, the exact opposite is true. I have been in those rooms with him when he's met with those leaders. I believe they think he's a laughing fool. That's John Bolton. Of course, it was National Security Advisor. I wish those people would speak up. I've said this before. I wish those people would speak up.
But that's where if you have a summit in the White House and you bring them in and you have a litany of people who Trump picked in top positions in his government, saying that, now it's not just out of a magazine or reported once as a one-off. It becomes powerful. And if you follow that with the Timothy Snyders and Ann Applebaums and Heather Cox Richardsons talking about history and how easy it is to move to an autocracy, the press is going to have to cover it, and not just once. So they've got to do a lot more to turn the focus of this and the frame of this away from it being just a referendum on Biden, who now is perceived more than before as old and befuddled and decrepit, and into the choice that we have and the stakes in this election. If he can't do that while also countering some of that image of his, we're sunk.
I think the press is more likely to cover the one with his former aides. That would be a powerful.
Well, no, that's. I'm talking about a 1-2 punch.
And then maybe this nightmare debate finally gets those people to take that stand, because they've said this publicly. They just won't say it again. They just won't appear publicly, and maybe they're afraid of Trump.
We're dealing with a Republican cult, and a lot of people worry about being shunned by their peers or facing death threats. These are courageous people who've spoken up. I think they will do it again, and I think that there are ways to get them to do it that showcase them, and particularly have a big group of people doing it.
Well, that would be very consequential, and I hope they'll do it, and I hope from your mouth to God's ears. And I've been asking these people to do that in different forums, and so far they just are resting on a few statements that are quoted.
I think having a podcast with John Kelly and Mark Esper would be a good thing for you to do if they are willing to do it.
Well, I'll ask them.
Yeah.
Okay, Norm, thank you so much on a rough day.
I knew you were worried that I wouldn't be up to the task, but I somehow soldiered on.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening. That beautiful music is by Leo Kottke, the great Leo Kottke. I want to thank Peter Ogburn for producing this podcast. We'll talk again next week.